Okay, let's get started, everyone. Good morning and welcome. My name is David Severance. I'm one of the coaches here at Chirag Shah Coaching. Many people think of me as the leadership coach. It's true that many of my agent clients do lead teams, although many others are individual agents as well. I'll tell you a little bit about myself and then we'll get started. First, let me just ask a question. How many folks here are leaders of a team versus members of a team? Versus independent agents? Could you just put into the chat box, just put in leader or member or solo agent, just so I can get a sense of who's in the room, please. Okay, great. Looks like everyone's pretty much a leader or a co-leader. Terrific. Well, glad to have you here. You're all welcome, as well as folks who are not necessarily team leaders, because a lot of what I talk about is not necessarily just applicable to team situations, but also applicable if you're a solo agent or you know a solo agent. We want to make sure that everyone's getting to the right sessions here, because we know that with this new program, there are different coaches doing different things. And while you are all invited and welcome at every session, we've tried to create these learning paths so that all of you can find the right kinds of programs that are right for you. But certainly you're welcome to attend any and all of the sessions. Most of my sessions are going to be focused on leading teams. That's interacting effectively with others, organizing your teams, communication, responding effectively to challenging environments, a whole wide range of things. And you may see something that's a little confusing, which is Tommy Pastana, another coach for us, will be doing programs on team building. So he and I come at the team situation from a slightly different point of view. So I encourage all of you to check out his sessions as well, and hopefully they're useful to you. Just a little background on me. I've been a certified coach for 17 years now. I've worked with leaders of startups, Fortune 500s, mid-sized companies, for-profits, nonprofits, government. I've worked with teams that are active in the United States, South America, Europe, Asia, Middle East. And dealing with so many different people in different industries and different countries around the world, you learn an awful lot about different ways to do business and be successful. And I think that's really important. And I try to cherry pick good elements and good practices from every place, because one thing I've learned in these 20 years of doing this work is we all think that we know the best way to do business. And sometimes we think that our way of doing business is the only way to do business. The reality is there's so many different ways. And working with so many of you, even with everybody in the same business, working alongside Compass, we see many, many different ways of running teams. I see Josh on the call here. He's got his own unique way of running his team. I see Corey on the call. She's got another way of running her team. So for those of you who are new here, delighted to have you with us. Let's get started. Let me pull up a slide. You'll find my sessions are quite similar to Chirag's in that sometimes we'll have slides, sometimes we won't. Sometimes we'll have a little more dialogue, sometimes we'll have less. Certainly feel free to put any comments or questions into the chat. I'll try to get to them when I can. And if you have any questions about anything, happy to follow up with you afterwards. And of course, like all the other sessions, the video and any deliverables or any other materials will be available on the platform at any time. If you haven't gotten on the platform yet, Brooke can help you to do that. So please, we encourage everybody to do that as soon as possible. So let me pull up a deck for today. And I'll share a couple of things regarding where we're going and then what we'll be focusing on today. Okay, got it. All right, can you see the slide deck? Brooke, are we up? Great. All right, I'm going to talk about monitoring and assessing performance. One of the things that comes up all the time when I talk with clients is, how can I get my agents and my team members to work better? I've got an agent who's gone rogue, or I've got an agent who won't join any of my meetings, or I've got, an admin person who's just not learning. And how can I make sure that these people are performing in the way that I want them and expect them to be able to do? And so, one thing we see in many cases is that we haven't had much of a plan or a program for actually monitoring that person's performance and, more importantly, managing it. So we'll get to that in just a moment. A couple more things just for you to know about the sessions that I'll be doing going forward. First, here are some of the other companies that I had a chance to work with before I started working with Compass. Chirag and I have known each other for 5 years. I got to know him when he joined my leadership program 5 years ago, and he spent a year working with me on various topics. And he gave a lot to that experience and took a lot from it. And when he created Chirag Shah Coaching, he said, David, please come and join us. Help us, with another perspective. I know these people can benefit from your perspective on so much of this stuff. So I said, great, glad to be there. So for the last 2 years, I've been working with many agents just like you all around the country. I also do a lot of work supporting the Compass folks inside Compass, like sales managers and AEMs and others. So who are my sessions for? A couple different types of folks, certainly leaders of current teams. If you're a leader, this is a good place to be. I hope it's useful to you. For those of you who may be thinking of forming a team right now, absolutely, this will give you some insights into what it takes to run a team effectively. And for people who may not actually be part of a team, but want to lead themselves to their own personal definition of success and fulfillment in their life, there's stuff here that you can take with you and apply, not just in your business, but hopefully beyond that as well. What will we cover during these sessions over the next few months? A whole lot of topics. Here are 6 broader categories that we'll be working with over time. Every one of these is highly relevant to your success and a highly valuable skill set for you to develop. One of the things that people don't quite understand about leadership is that they think that leadership and management are the same thing. So if you've been managing yourself as a solo agent and you know how to manage the sales process, many people think, well, if I just bring some people on, I don't have to do anything differently, or I don't have to think anything differently. But what we see so often over and over again is somebody gets successful, somebody gets busy, and they say, I need to bring a couple of people on. So they bring on a seller's agent, they bring on a buyer's agent, they bring on an admin, and suddenly they're dealing with a whole lot of issues that they never had to deal with before that are outside of the typical sales process. And so moving to the role of leader pushes you to have to think about a lot of things and have to do certain things that might not be necessary when you're acting on your own. And this is the kind of the wake-up call, unfortunately, that so many agents have told us. They said, I brought all these people on so that I wouldn't have to be so busy, but I'm busier than ever. And actually, I thought that I would bring people on and they'd just be out there making a lot of money, and I'll just sit back cashing all the checks, and it's like ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. But what they realize sometimes is now they have a lot of costs, both in time and in money. And so they end up at the end of the day, not as successful as they'd like to be. We don't want that to happen to you. We want you to gain all of the possibility and potential that comes along with bringing people onto your team. So we'll be covering these topics, all related to leadership, all related to managing your team. How to succeed with my sessions? 3 simple things. 1, I'll urge you the same way that Chirag did the last couple of days. Please turn on your video. It's important not just because I'm asking people to be here and so you can connect with each other, but because the practice of leadership is the practice of relationship. If you believe that leadership has nothing to do with relationship, you need to keep thinking about that a little bit, because fundamentally leadership is a relationship game. And how do you relate with people? You have to connect with people. So all of the work that we'll be doing here is focused on helping you connect more deeply and more profoundly with people, and how to influence people more effectively. Because I believe that every good thing that happens in your life is a result of you successfully connecting and or influencing someone around you, whether it's a team member, whether it's a client, whether it's somebody in your family. Every good result in life comes from connection and influence. Third, have courage to try what's unfamiliar or uncomfortable. As I said, many people think that leadership is the same as management. All they have to do is basically the same thing they've been doing before. But the reality is you have to do things differently. You have to think differently. And that brings up a lot of question marks for us. And of course, it's easy to do things that are comfortable and easy for us and familiar to us. It's not so easy to branch out and do things that are unfamiliar or uncomfortable. But that's the learning journey for all of us. So I hope that you'll join me in being as courageous as you can in working on the stuff that we're focusing on and taking the action to put it into your business. Chirag and I are absolutely united in our philosophy. Our background is different, but our philosophy is the same. And one key piece of that is we don't want you to just sit here and listen to a nice conversation. We want to try to translate this stuff into simple steps that you can take that impact your business positively. So let's get to it. Topic for today is around managing performance. So we're going to be looking for the next 3-4 sessions about how do I manage the performance of the people around me? Let me first ask you to put into the chat box, have you had an experience where you've brought people onto your team and they haven't performed as expected, and you've struggled to get the performance out of them that you originally envisioned or wanted? If so, put a yes in the chat box, please. Okay, great. A lot of yeses in there. For most of us, when we start working with other people or when we start living with other people, anybody married here, we sometimes struggle with the way that other people do things. And so the question is, how can I manage that situation in a way that gets me closer to the benefits that I was looking for or originally intended, rather than continuing to suffer from a certain loss of performance that I can recognize? Well, there's a number of things that we'll talk about over the month that relate to this, but I want to just bring out two things for today for you to begin thinking about. And this is monitoring and assessing. It's important to recognize that you need a process, you need a framework, you need a system for managing performance. It's not just, well, so-and-so screwed up again, I really hope she'll do it better. Or maybe I should fire her, maybe I shouldn't, I don't really know what to do, so I'll just let it go a little further. Unfortunately, that's kind of the default for most of us. We don't want to have a difficult conversation. We're not really sure how to have a conversation about it. And so we kind of just let it go and hope it gets better. Well, I always say hope is not a strategy. It's just, a condition. And so as all of us are thinking about what's been our experience working with other people, especially those that we've brought onto our team, to what degree do we have some kind of a system or process for managing that relationship? And a system and process implies intention, it implies organization or structure, it implies process. And so if you don't have a clear intention or a clear process or organization, we want to help you with that. And we'll start with a couple of pieces of that today. 3 parts of managing performance. If ultimately you want to get better performance out of your people, there's 3 things that you need to think about and put into your system: monitoring performance, assessing and evaluating performance, managing performance. By the way, I'll suggest anyone take notes as we go through any of these, because notes that you jot down to yourself in the moment sometimes are a lot more useful than looking back at the slides afterwards. Of course, you'll always have access to the slides. You'll always have access to the videos, but we know people are busy and they don't always get back to that stuff. So as we talk through anything, not just for my sessions, but for all the CSC sessions, I suggest you keep a notepad or take pictures with your camera or something that helps you remember what it is that's coming up for you in the moment. So 3 simple parts of managing performance: monitoring, assessing, and then managing. These first 2 pieces are often overlooked. Monitoring. What is monitoring? Monitoring is observing or tracking in some way the goals that have previously been set, the expectations that you may have, whether they're written down or they're just in your head, or the expected output that a person is supposed to provide. I'll take a stab on and guess that those of you who are leading teams are probably monitoring the GCI of your salespeople. Is that correct? Please put in the chat box if you monitor the GCI. Okay, a lot of yeses, a couple of not often enoughs, a couple of nopes. So let me ask you a second question put in the chat. What do you monitor specifically other than GCI, if anything? Okay, deals I hand off, number of closing, lead source, deal source, lead conversion, marketing dollars, great. So there are certain things that you're tracking in your business. That's good. You have to track your business to understand what's going on. Chirag's talked about that the last couple of days. But it's not just about tracking certain things. You want to track performance along the way, because the results that you have, whether it's total sales, whether it's total profit, comes from performance, right? And so if you're not tracking performance, if you're just tracking total sales, in a sense, you're tracking the results, you're not tracking the process, or at least you're not breaking down the results into like further clarity for yourself. For example, let's say you had 8 agents out there and 7 of those agents are doing nothing, and the eighth one is crushing it. Right? If you didn't know, if you didn't look at the performance of each individual agent, you might think, hey, our performance is pretty good. Look at the big number that we've come up with at the end of the year. But actually, it's all one person. And maybe all those other people are costing you in some way, for example, in terms of time or energy or mind share. And so the question for me to ask all of you is, what are you tracking? More specifically, when we're talking about performance, What are we tracking there? It could be any number of things. GCI, absolutely, should be tracking that. Lead conversion, absolutely, that's a good one to track. If you have an admin person, you say you have a 20,000 names in the CRM and you'd like them to clean it up over the next 6 weeks. How are they doing with that? Are you monitoring that? Are you tracking that in any way? Response rate for marketing is a good one to track, certainly not directly related to what we're talking about here. And referrals. If you have agents that are getting 2, 3, 4 referrals a year and you get others that are getting 0, if you didn't track that, you didn't know that, you wouldn't be able to do anything about it. So the first important piece here is to take stock of what am I tracking? What am I not tracking that I could be tracking or should be tracking? So now put into the chat box, what's one thing that you think maybe you should be tracking that you're not tracking right now? Especially if it relates to individual performance. CRM, fine. Lead conversion, good. Daily, weekly activities, lead conversion. This is important stuff. If you're not tracking it, most of this stuff is pretty easy to track, right? It's just a matter of doing it. So we're going to give you a simple system here that you can start building from today, and you can add to as you need. It's not difficult to do this stuff. It's just a matter of making time for it. So daily activities. How many of you track the time spent by different people on your team and what those activities are? Right? If you look at people's calendars, you can start with your own. Where am I injecting, where am I spending my precious limited time? And what's the return I'm getting for that? What's the ROI on that? And then looking at your own staff, same thing. What's the output or production for the various stuff that they're working on? So that's monitoring. You need to have a clear list of items that you think are worth your monitoring and tracking for your business. Second, assessment. Once you're tracking things, that's about gathering data. It's not about making any sense of the data yet. It's simply about understanding what the data says. Secondly, then, once you have the data in hand, you need to think about, okay, so how does this data tell me a story about the business? And how does that story relate to what is it I want this business to be or to look like? And so that's where we're comparing the intention for bringing this person on, having this person focusing on these particular issues, compared to whatever the results are. So tracking lead conversion is great, but how does your lead conversion relate to the actual total target that you have for the year or the month or the quarter, whatever it might be, right? That's what assessment is about. It's about holding the results up to a particular framework or a particular target. Does that make sense? Great. It can be very simple, folks. This doesn't have to be very complicated at all. You can do something simple just like this. You can take each person on your team and you can do a separate assessment grid for that person, or you can do it for the whole team together. But it really doesn't have to be anything more than this. All of you can do this. First, you make a list on the left of the responsibility or the deliverable or the expectation that you have for that particular person. When you brought the person on, or when you sat down and you said, okay, here are our goals for the year, or here are your goals for the year, and you agreed on whatever those things are, that's the expectation. That's the deliverable. And those specific items should be listed on the left. It could be, I expect you to do this much in GCI this year. That's the deliverable. Or it could be, I expect, we had this conversation when we first got together that you're going to keep me informed on such and such in such and such a way, right? Like you're going to call me every time before you make a decision with the client to do X, for example. Or maybe I made a big point to you that when you came on that you need to be responsive. If I send you an email or I text you or something, I want a response right away. You said, yep, I can do business that way. I think that's good. I'm going to do that. And then you find out that the person hasn't been responsive at all, right? You send that email, they don't reply that afternoon, they don't reply that night, they don't reply the next morning. What's going on there? It doesn't really matter what the deliverable or responsibility is. What matters is that you're clear about what it is. And you need to list those on the left. It's quite possible that you might not be absolutely clear about what that expectation was, or you may have thought you were clear with your teammate, but you weren't. In any case, what you're going to find is that person's performance didn't measure up to the expectation in some cases. And so then you just check on the right. Is this person below expectation, at expectation, or above expectation? A very simple way to assess where the individual is at this particular moment in time. So this is something that everyone can do. It doesn't cost you any money. It just takes a little bit of time. My own personal advice to all of you is that you should spend 2 or 3% of your time every week on leadership activities like this. If you work 40 hours a week, 5% of your time would be 2 hours. Less than 5% of your time would be less than 2 hours. If you can carve out 1 hour a week to do things like this, to keep track of stuff in your business, not only do you know where your business is, it sets you up to have the conversations you need to have to drive better performance. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So let me ask a couple of questions. How many of you have had a conversation with someone about their performance where it became clear during the conversation that you guys had two different ideas about what the goal or expectation was? I'd like someone to come off mute and just share that with us, please, briefly. Conversation you had with a teammate where the performance wasn't there in your mind, and you realized later that you guys simply weren't on the same page.
I can talk about that.
Okay, please.
It was actually a newer agent that just thought they were just going to go out and, get deals left and right. And we did the 5, 4, tell me how to make myself successful. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, do this every day. Report to me every Friday. And every week it was like, no, I called 2 people. No, I called 1 person. Why am I not getting leads? You're not doing what we told you to do. You have to be on coaching 3 days a week for me to give you leads. You're a new agent, and it's just back and forth and back and forth. So.
Got it. Thank you. It's very easy. I'll be right with you in just a moment there, Liz. It's very easy to miscommunicate on what an expectation is. We see this all the time. The message is sent. We think it's sent clearly. The person doesn't hear it the way that we sent it. There's something that happens in that space, the way we said it or the way they heard it. And then they're acting on let's call it a misunderstanding of what was expected in the first place. And we never knew that that was existing until we looked at the performance, and the performance was different from what we expected. And when we finally talked about it, we realized they had a different idea from what we thought we had originally communicated. Liz?
I don't know if this will add to it, but very much what was just said, just to play on that. I had an agent we brought on, the collective of us at the time. There were 6 other agents. We brought a new agent on. And almost a year later, I had to let him go. He did nothing. And so as I'm listening to this now, I'm like, oh my God, like my gut said, this isn't going to end well. Let him go sooner rather than later. So in terms of the cost of our time and resources, I wish I'd taken this, thought of this 6 months ago. But so in terms of bringing on a newer agent, and this guy was also a newer agent with a great book of business from previous careers, but just wasn't willing to apply it to real estate at all. So
Yep,
lesson
understood.
learned.
What we so often find, unfortunately, is the original contracting conversation. That is the conversation that we had at the beginning of this dialogue with the client, whether it's the beginning of their employment with you or whether it's a new task that they're going to take on or a new responsibility you've given them. We didn't have enough clarity and alignment in that conversation. Nathaniel suggests here, for example, putting it in writing. Absolutely, putting things in writing helps in certain cases. We're going to talk more in a future session about being totally aligned on a team. I define being aligned on a team as being in clear and explicit agreement. And the word explicit there refers to having an explicit discussion about something rather than assumption. And more importantly, putting it in black and white. And this is, of course, what happens with contracts. It's black and white. Can you imagine if every contract on the face of the earth was just a handshake and a verbal conversation? It'd be a mess, right? We try to reduce that mess by putting everything in black and white. But in our businesses, we often don't. And even if we do, there's still potential for misunderstanding, right? We're not talking about a legal situation here. What we're talking about is clarity and alignment. And so as a leader, it's your job to ensure that clarity and alignment is happening on your team at all time. Doesn't mean that you can be responsible for how everybody hears everything with you, but you are responsible for ensuring that they have the opportunity to understand and that they do understand. Because if they do understand and you are aligned, then it's just a matter of, do they have the skills and the motivation to do it? Not, are they thinking about a different kind of result or outcome than you are? All right, we'll talk more about that in another session as well. Josh, you had a hand up? You there, Josh?
Oh, there it is. It wasn't
Okay,
letting me
yep, we got
unmute.
you.
Sorry. Yeah, an example for me of, I mean, I feel very guilty of not setting myself up properly in this case, but the first time I hired an operations professional, I hired somebody who was a good friend and I knew was like very, very intelligent. And as a result, like I put just an overwhelming, like a lot of trust. Like this is going to work itself out. This is going to be okay. This is a super smart guy. He's going to figure it out. And so like I felt so confident going into the situation. Like I found the all-star, blah blah blah. That like I was comfortable to like be like, oh, I'm super busy with all of these things. I'm not going to get into the weeds to make sure we are buttoned up and 100% aligned on, like all of our goals or like exactly what this person's doing. And a year later, like we were parting ways. And so I think that many lessons to have learned in that scenario. But like it is, after that, like I understand the value of like not only having the explicit conversations, but like following up, making sure everything's in writing and in a contract for no confusion down the road.
Yep, got it. Thank you. What this all requires is all of you being absolutely clear in your mind what the expectations are, right? You can't hold somebody accountable for something you're not clear about in the first place. And so as a leader, this has nothing to do with a particular sale you're doing or what market you're in. It's a matter of being clear of who is on my team and what does each role entail, right? What are the responsibilities for each individual person on my team? And as far as performance goes, what are the key elements that we need to come to alignment on? And so if you're not clear about that, or you've never written it down, a step for you to take this week is to write down on a piece of paper, what are the elements of each role on my team that I believe are the non-negotiables in terms of performance? Maybe it is lead conversion. Maybe it is making 5 phone calls a day. Maybe it is a certain amount of GCI each quarter. It doesn't really matter what it is, but you need to be clear about what it is. And then once you've created that list, ask yourself, have I really clearly communicated this to my teammates? And a way you can test that is you can have a discussion with each of your teammates one by one and just say, what is it that you believe are the highest priorities for you in your role? And see what that person says. And if that person says exactly what you wrote down on the list, you're in alignment. If that person says anything else, it's a clear signal right there that you're not in alignment. Either you didn't communicate it, or maybe you weren't clear at the time, or maybe they weren't listening carefully. It doesn't matter. It's that you weren't on the same page at that time. And so they've been acting out of a different kind of mindset all this time. So a couple takeaways from today. 3 things to remember as far as management goes. Monitor, assess, then manage, right? The monitor piece requires you to be clear about what are the deliverables in the first place. And you may need to go back and re-clarify those things. So write down for each of your staff, what is the clear deliverable for this person, for me in this role? And you can, if you have like an admin and they have 100 different things in the job description, maybe a lot of that work is done for you. But chances are you don't have as clear a job description for your buyer's agent or your seller's agent. Certain things can fall through the cracks. Certain times you want them to check in with you or somebody else, or certain things that you would like them to share, somebody to share information with about the client or something so they can get into the CRM. Lots of things may be part of that role in your mind that you never really clarified. And if that's the case, then you write it down and you can have a second conversation with the person later saying, let's re-clarify what this role entails, with the intention that you come out of that second or third conversation, whatever it takes, so that you are on the same page. And then as part of that conversation, you say, here are the things we're going to be tracking together over time. We're going to be tracking your GCI. We're going to be tracking, how you're keeping up to date with Business Tracker or notes getting in there for every single conversation or something like that. It's relatively easy to do. You don't have to put a lot of things on there. I would say keep it as short as possible. Start with the most important deliverables first and just start there. And then as time goes on, you can add others if you feel that the person's up to it and you're up to it. But if you can't start with a shared foundation, you're always going to suffer, and not just, suffer in terms of performance. You're probably suffering in terms of headaches and time, right? Because every time there's a misunderstanding of a deliverable or an expectation, it costs you time or costs you money, right? Something you need to fix, something that you're frustrated about. Maybe you need to hire another person to come in and fix the problem, right? There's all kinds of things that come out of this initial lack of alignment. So no blame or judgment here. If you didn't have it all in organized and in hand before, no worries. Start now. Start where you are. Put these things into action. So let me just have you put something into the chat. What's the next step for you as a part of this process? I just want to see where people are. What's the next step you want to take here? Create a list of what I want to monitor. That's a really good one. If you don't have that written down somewhere, you need to get it down there. Get clear on deliverables, write up expectations and discuss, take the time to draft performance metrics, going over team member roles and responsibilities, better, clear communication. Great. Alex, so better, clear communication is really important. It's important for you to think about what do you mean by that, right? Like what specifically under that category of better communication is where you want to focus your attention. And this is true for everybody. Okay, folks, we're out of time for today. I'm delighted to be with you this morning. Looking forward to seeing you again next Wednesday, where we'll continue this conversation. We'll go more into, how you can manage this process, but these kind of foundational pieces need to be a part of it. So keep your notes handy, think about it, pull them out next week. Maybe you can keep a separate notebook or a separate section of your book for these sessions, as opposed to the ones that you're doing with Chirag or anybody else, so that you can track yourself through this leadership process. Thanks, everybody. Welcome anybody's feedback on today's call. Looking forward to seeing you again in a good week. In a week. Have a good week, everybody.